The Redemption of Benjamin Whitley. A Tale of the Old West. Chapter 2. The next morning, in the gray dawnlight, John rose and helped his father water the oxen. His mother and Marian were already preparing breakfast over the fire. The cornmeal pancakes were sizzling most appetizingly upon the iron spider, and the pot of coffee with its fragrant aroma that Sarah always described as smelling like the morning appeared as pleasing as coffee only can, that has been roasted from green coffee beans over a campfire 15 minutes ago, and freshly brewed over the same fire a half-minute ago. When John had finished, he went to wake Sarah, who was still sleeping soundly in the tent she shared with Marian. He peered through the opening of the tent at her, then knelt and gently jostled her shoulder. "Time to get up, sunshine," he said softly. Her sky-blue eyes sleepily opened and met his smiling brown ones. "Very well," she said sleepily. She yawned and stretched, then slowly arose, pushing her tousled brown hair out of her eyes. John got up and went over to his mother and Marian as Sarah washed up. "Good morning, Mother," he said, stooping and kissing her cheek. "Good morning, Mary," he said, turning to his sister, who returned his greeting. Mrs. Skinner answered her boy's greeting with a loving smile. "Good morning, my son." Then she raised her voice slightly to reach her husband, who was doing something at the back of the wagon. "Dearest, we are ready for prayer and breakfast when you are." After the family had finished eating, they began to repack the few supplies they had removed back into their wagon in preparation for the day's journey. The sun was just starting to stream through the trees behind them towards the east and was bathing them and the surrounding countryside in its beautiful morning light. Mr. Skinner and John were just going to start harnessing up the oxen when a voice arrested their attention. "Morning, Lambert." The voice came from a wiry, sun-tanned man who had stridden up to them. It was Alfred Bush, their good friend and fellow traveler. He removed his hat and nodded politely at Mrs. Skinner and the girls. "Good morning, Bush," returned Lambert cordially. "Did you need something?" "I was just wondering if perhaps you or John here could help us out of a little trouble we were having with one of the wagons, Sharp's to be exact." Bush turned from Lambert to John. "I know you have a little bit of experience with the repair of these things, right, John?" Alfred lifted his bushy black eyebrows questioningly. John's heart leapt inside of him, though outwardly he looked only thoughtful and calm. God was providing an opportunity to reach out to Sharp so soon. "Yes, sir, I have some experience," he responded, and then he looked questioningly at his father. "Yes, go and see what you can do," said Mr. Skinner. "When I finish up here, I'll come and lend you a hand." "Thank you, Father," John said. "It's something with the axle that ain't working right," explained Bush on their way over. "But neither of us can make heads nor tails out of it. Sharp's rather annoyed and isn't the nicest to deal with right now, not that he ever—" Bush pulled himself up short. "Well, I may as well just hold my tongue there," he said, chiding himself, then turned rather apologetically to John. "I reckon part of his annoyance could be from holding us up." He shrugged his shoulders and ran his hand through his still thick graying hair, then turned and laid his hand on John's shoulder. "I appreciate your willingness to help out, John," he said, as his pleasant gray eyes, that could at times look very intense and piercing under the shaggy black brows, met John's. He had become quite fond of John during their family's acquaintance with one another, stemming partly from the fact that the only son he and Amelia ever had lay in a little infant's grave back in a grove of trees at their old home in Alabama. "Glad to, sir," responded John warmly. When they got there, Sharp was under the wagon, muttering to himself while he made a great deal of noise with a hammer or something, and tools were strewn about on the ground around and under the wagon. "I'll make ya move," they heard Sharp say loudly to himself, followed by a string of names that were by no means complimentary, as he banged harder on whatever the offending article was. Amid all the clatter, Bush leaned down and spoke up loudly. "Mr. Sharp, sir, I brought the young man I told you about who has experience in repairing wagons, Mr. Skinner's son, John." The only answer to this was an increased volley of hammering. "Mr. Sharp," began Alfred again, "perhaps you would be so good as to let this here lad take a look at it. We want to get moving as soon as possible, and take advantage of these cool morning hours." I am afraid the answer to this was of a more aggressive nature. The hammer came flying out from under the wagon, narrowly missing Mr. Bush's left shin as they both started and almost jumped. Exchanging glances with one another, they watched as the hammer's surly owner crawled out from under the wagon, looking red in the face, grass and grease sticking in his hair, as well as on his hands. Standing up, he cast a pair of very keen blue eyes at John and eyed him up and down in a way that made John feel uncomfortable. "So, you're the boy, huh? Well, be quick about it. Just remember, boy, this here rig's a real wagon, not a toy one like what you play with at home." Sharp grinned at him insolently, his frustration leaving him now that he had a chance to pick on someone. He watched John closely, waiting to see his reaction with a very satirical expression on his face. John thought he had never seen a sharper, more conniving face, but what impressed him most were Sharp's eyes. They would have been very handsome eyes, they were such a deep shade of blue and had great power of expression. But the cold, lifeless look down deep inside of them was so cuttingly dark, half veiled under a certain bitter haughtiness, that you could hardly look into them without feeling as though you were looking down a long tunnel of darkness, with a hopeless feeling that there was no light at the end. John was far from angry at the taunt. God had filled him with a deep love and compassion for this man. He only colored a little, and the tone he replied in was quiet and respectful. "Certainly, sir." In a moment he was under the wagon checking things out. It didn't take him long to discern the problem, which was obvious to his more trained eyes. Thankfully, it was easily remedied. John called out this information and heard Bush's glad reply. As John worked on it, Bush went back to his family, and Sharp started repacking his supplies into the wagon. In about 20 minutes, John had it wrapped up. He wiped his greasy hands on the grass and crawled out from underneath the wagon and stood up. He spotted Sharp at the back of the wagon. "That should do it, Mr. Sharp," said John cheerfully, while he scanned Sharp's face searchingly. "Lord, should I say or do anything else right now?" he prayed silently. "Humph," said Sharp, and without taking another look at John, he proceeded to untie his already harnessed oxen and lead them over to the shafts of the wagon. The oxen were annoyed at being taken from their grazing, however, and began to act restive and were trying to go in opposite directions. Instantly, John was on the other side of them, opposite Sharp, and with their combined efforts, they were able to get them hitched up. Not one word of thanks passed Sharp's lips, though occasionally he glanced shrewdly at John. When they had finished, Sharp turned and silently mounted the driver's box. "Well, good day to you then," said John in farewell. Sharp ignored him, staring straight ahead. "Crazy lad," he muttered to himself as John left. "Hope I never see him again." So what caused him to turn his head and glance once more at John's retreating figure? End of chapter 2.